Our theme, as you know, is living in harmony, food, health and the planet. For a subject like that, we simply could not have a better principal speaker than Patrick Holden. Patrick, welcome to Keynsham. But let me start by thanking the various groups and organisations who have come together to make this evening possible. Huge thanks to all our sponsors, and particularly to the University of the West of England and their Self City project, and they're represented here by Ian Smith this evening. Thanks, Ian. And the lead organisers of Transition Keynsham, and we're very grateful to Keynsham Fair Trade, who, particularly importantly, have provided fair trade wine and soft drinks for the fair trade reception which follows the main event. Our other sponsors include Keynsham Action Network, Live Simply, Keynsham Community Energy, Keynsham Wombles, Chewton Keynsham Eco Church, Saltford Environment Group, and Keynsham Food Cooperative. We thank you all for your support. But tonight's theme is all about food, and we're actually very fortunate with where we live. We have some excellent local food businesses, such as Buses and Venables in the High Street, Leslie Bowes at Chewton Farm, the Severn Project, Heavenly Hedgerows, and a number of other companies, some of whose produce there'll be an opportunity to sample a little bit later. Prominent in the local firmament, though, is the community farm at Chew Magna. And we're delighted to welcome Per Desgarian, its managing director, as our opening speaker this evening. The community farm is a non-profit social enterprise trying to get people to re-engage with farming and the land, and working to provide a strong, ethical and sustainable future for our farmers. As well as being its managing director, PED is also founder and director of Bristol Food Producers, an organisation created to help upskill food producers and increase local food production in the Bristol area. He's also a member of the core team of Transition Bath. PED, it's good to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So we're a social enterprise, not-for-profit social enterprise. So we have a business side and we have a social side. And the idea is that the business side can, one day in the future hopefully, give us enough money to run the social side and all the social projects that we do. So as Alistair was saying, the farm was started. Now, the concept came around 8 years ago. And the idea was based around the fact that we wanted to get people on the land. We wanted to get people re-engaging with food, with farming, with local food production, and understanding the process that gets it from the field onto your table. There was quite a famous report, well, some people quite a famous report, in Bristol called the Feed Bristol Report, which identified that there was only somewhere in the region of 5% of the food being sold in Bristol was actually locally produced, and the rest of it was all coming through supermarkets, being produced abroad, far away, further around England, and we had a very poor food system that was supporting the local area. So that was a kind of driving force behind why the farm started in the first place. Over the last 6 years, we've grown a box scheme to supply over 450 boxes a week in peak season throughout Bristol, Bath, Keynsham, Chew Valley and into Frome. We won the Organic Box Scheme of the Year last year, so you don't take my word that the boxes are pretty good. And we've really worked a lot on getting people on the land, and that's been the core of why we're there, and we're quite proud of what we've achieved there. And it's a wonderful place to come. It's a fantastic location that overlooks Chew Valley Lake, so for those of you that have been there, you would have seen the amazing vistas that you get up there. For those of you who haven't, it's right next to Salt Malt, which everyone seems to know, the fish and chip shop just by the lake. So if you do go there for fish and chips, please, it's an open farm, do pop over and have a little look around. Last year alone, we had over 1,000 people come to the farm for a single visit. Now, that was an increase of somewhere in the region of 30 or 40% on the year before, and every year as the farm, knowledge of the farm goes out further and further, and people realise how open and welcoming we are, and what they can come and learn at the farm, we're finding more and more groups want to engage and come up. So it's really, really important to us that we keep that growth going, and we've got a number of wonderful ways to engage with the farm that you can get involved in, depending on what it is that you're interested in doing. So I think for us, we are a CSA, which is a community supported agriculture, so we do rely on a lot of volunteer work, but we don't try to rely on volunteer work to make the actual farm production exist as an entity, although it is obviously very helpful. What's very important for us is that people that come to volunteer at the farm are getting something from the farm itself. So we might be getting a little bit of extra labour, which is absolutely fantastic. You know, some days we've got 7 tonne of squash to get off the field, and quite frankly, with 4 members of staff, you just can't do it. But when you have 40 people who come along on a Saturday, and it's this amazing atmosphere, this amazing feeling of, I don't know how best to describe it, to quote something someone did say to me the other day, and it does sound very cheesy, but they did say, you know, they turn up, there are 2 people coming to a community farm a day. One of them was a new person, the other person regular, comes every Saturday that we have them. We have about 14 throughout the year. And he turned around to this new person and he said, you know, we come here as strangers, but we leave as friends. You know, and it does sound very cheesy, but it is true. You know, you come along to these days, you have these shared experiences, and they're absolutely magical. And what's really important is the effect that it has on the people that are coming. So not only are they learning about the food and where it comes from, not only are they learning about how food grows and the challenges as well, because we're not a successful, well, yeah, it's not fair to say, we're not a profitable organisation. You know, we're successful in that we hit the goals that we've always wanted to hit, and we are getting there, and hopefully, you know, one day we will make a profit. But farming is difficult, and people don't really accept that reality in this country. And I think when you get a chance to go to a farm to see how it works, and to see the struggles that are going on there, you know, and we're not a proper working farm, and we don't live on the land, and we're not there 24/7 like a farmer is, you know, who has it much worse, quite frankly. But we're a social enterprise that's working in farming. Social enterprise is hard to run, and farming is a really difficult business to be in. So we are all working. You know, everyone who's here who works at the farm knows what I mean when I'm saying it. The people who are working on the land, and it is hard work. And it's wonderful that people can come and engage and learn about it, because it's something that we need to open our eyes to as a country. And we've got a very interesting period coming up in the year when we come into Brexit. And I think there's probably going to be a lot of real realities that come out around the way farming works, and the way it's subsidised, and the way that people are making a living. And there's a lot of very good opportunity, but I think probably Patrick might touch on some of that. So I won't get too much detail. I get that angry and a bit passionate about it. So I'll go back into the farm a little bit more. So one of the things we do to try and alleviate the pressure on farmers and the farmers that we work with is that we have a very healthy local supply chain. We have about 6 or 7 local producers. It's we call it a very loose cooperative. We all sit together, we plan every year, we look at where we're going to get the produce from, we get different items from different people, we try to all kind of grow in a way that suits our box scheme, suits some of the people that we provide wholesale to, and we try to grow in a way that minimises surplus that we're growing as well. And one of the core things that we do is that we pay above the market price for the produce. So where you will get potatoes in the wholesale market, might be at 25 or 30 pence, we will endeavour to pay, you know, 50 to 60 pence to our local growers. And that's because, quite frankly, 25 pence a kilo for potatoes, I don't know, is verging on criminal, really. No one can make a living off that. And what's very important is that these local farmers, they go on a journey with us as well. So we're growing our business. We've grown our business for roughly about 6% our box scheme year on year. And the great thing is that these farmers then get to grow more produce and sell more produce, and sell it through a medium that they know they can trust, that they can trust to pay them the fair price, that they can trust to have a continual source. And it really helps them plan for their future a lot more. There's farmers that we work with who will quite happily put their hand up and say, we wouldn't be existing if it wasn't for the Community Farm App. You know, and whilst in some ways from a business perspective that's a lot of risk for your business, but because if we were to go bust tomorrow, it would be very good for them. What it does do is it shows that it is starting to work, what we're trying to do. And people who do come to the farm, they are learning about what we do. And what we do as an organisation is our values and our core values, our ethics, is every level of the farm, people get that. You know, from the seasonal workers that come every year to help out, from the people that are working in box packing in the warehouse, and the people who are running the organisation, to the volunteer board, to the 500 people who put money into the farm at the beginning to begin with for community shares. They all understand our values, and I think when you come to the farm, you really get a sense of what we're about, and you get a sense of what farming's about, and you can ask any question, and it doesn't matter if you don't know anything about farming, it doesn't matter, you know, we're there to teach. So we really try to make sure that if you do want to come to the farm, if you want to learn about farming, that it is there for you, to be a vessel for you to find out what's going on. Yeah, we also have a business, which is it's quite nice if you want to support that. So we do vegetable boxes around here. I can't remember off the top of my head what day we do deliver, but you can go on our website and have a look. They are award-winning boxes. You know, the national award last year just speaks for itself as to how good they are. They're very good value. You know, you're getting the produce is often picked a day or two before you're getting it, so it's very, very fresh produce. And it's a great way to support us if you don't want to come to the farm. You know, and I really shouldn't turn down money. So you know, please do buy a box.
Thank you very much indeed, and I know that we're hoping to plan a visit to the community farm from Keynsham early in the new year, so we look forward to seeing it all, and you know, thank you for the plug, and I would add that actually they are really good vegetable boxes and firmly recommended, so that's great. And so from a local focus, we move now to a global and perhaps a more scientific and philosophical perspective, but while still remaining intensely practical. And doubtless our boots will remain muddy. Patrick Holden was born in London and spent a year in his youth in California, where he first came across what we now call organic farming, although my understanding is that term didn't exist in those days. He returned to the UK, studied biodynamic farming at Emerson College, and in 1973 established a community farm in West Wales, where his family still produce cheese from your Ayrshire cattle, as I understand it. He was the founding chairman of British Organic Farmers in 1982, and then in 1988 he joined the Soil Association, initially as a trustee. He became director of the charity in 1995, and served in that role for 15 years. And during that time, the scale and impact of organic farming in this country grew to what it is today, with recognised standards and a market which is no longer a niche, but well accepted for the quality and benefits it brings. In 2011, Patrick established the Sustainable Food Trust, which works internationally to accelerate the transition towards more sustainable food systems. Patrick, again, welcome. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
You all for coming here on a cold Wednesday evening, and also thank you all to the producers and all the other people who made this meeting possible, especially Erica. I am a farmer, a dairy farmer, and although my day job takes me away from the farm for much of the time, I'm going back to the farm tonight because the food programme, in the form of Dan Saladino, I don't know how many of you listen to the food programme, the Radio 4 food programme, are making a programme about cheese making, and they're using our farm as a kind of case study. With a woman called Bronwyn Percival, who's the cheese grader from Neal's Yard Dairy, which is a London-based cheese wholesaler and retailer who are really good cheesemongers. And so I'm going to go back, and I'll probably get back to the farm about 11 o'clock tonight, to join in a conversation which is going to be about the connection between farming practice and food quality, in this case cheese, and how the whole thing is one interconnected whole. So I won't rush away, but I will be leaving quite soon after the question session. Apologies for that. Your introduction would sort of trace my early history, and the thing that I feel that is important for me still is that I go back to the farm, because a lot of my experiences come from practical farming. And I'm still milking the cows, and the farm, which I'll show you at the end of the talk, is about 300 acres. We have an Ayrshire dairy herd, and we make now all of the milk, virtually all of the milk, into cheese, and we're trying to be self-sufficient on the farm and to produce a surplus of food from the land, whilst at the same time maintaining and building the fertility of the soil and the biodiversity and all the sort of natural capital, as it's called these days, that we inherited when we came to the farm, and we hope that we'll leave it in a better state when we leave it or pass it on, but at the same time producing a genuine surplus of food from the resources of the planet. And it seems to me that that's what all food production needs to do if we're going to pass on our planet to future civilizations in any kind of fit state. But the problem is that we're not doing that in our food systems. I'd like to just sort of explain a bit how and why that came to pass. There's a book that I read a few years ago called Collapse by Jared Diamond, which is the story about how throughout human history civilizations have tended to exhaust the fertility of their soils or cut down their forests until they reached a critical point where they were short of the resources, and then they descended into conflict, and then very often there was a population collapse. And he gives examples of Easter Island, where they cut down all the trees, and the Greenland and Mayan civilizations where you had sudden collapses. And then another book that's been written about soil, more recently by a man called David Montgomery, talks about how if you look at the Roman civilization and all the civilizations, they tended to sort of mine and exhaust the fertility of the soil and then move on. But the problem we've got today is we've globalized everything, and we've intensified and industrialized everything, and now we're living beyond the means of the planet to support us. And Jared Diamond says at the end of his book, the problem with the next collapse, if we don't do something about it, is that it will be global because of globalization. So really that leads to the question, can we avoid the sort of collapse that might at worst present itself to us in the 21st century? I want to refer to the work of a man called Johan Rockström, Professor Johan Rockström, who's introduced this concept of planetary boundaries. This means, are we operating inside or outside the carrying capacity of the planet? And he's identified a number of areas where we are operating outside. It's a bit red, that thing, but it gives you an impression of it. And the crucial thing that he brings to our attention, and he gave these conclusions in a talk he did with David Attenborough in Oxford a few months ago, probably about a year ago now, was that in several key areas, all the key areas actually, where we are most exceeding the carrying capacity of the planet, namely greenhouse gas emissions, biodiversity, water, soil, and nitrogen fertilizer and the pollutants resulting from its use. All of those areas where we are living beyond our means, where maybe we're using the resources of two planets to support our existing population, they all go back to food. So if we carry on as we are, living beyond the carrying capacity of the planet, it is inevitable that there's going to be a series of problems, and he specifically calls out irreversible climate change, critical declines of biodiversity to the point where there will be some kind of ecological breakdown, and obviously, as Jared Diamond mentions, wars and conflicts and diseases. And if you fast forward to 2050, he's saying that's the critical point of no return. Then he says, if we're going to avoid those catastrophes, we have to transform our food systems. And he goes on to say in this talk, I'm not talking here about a small niche organic market. I'm talking about the whole of our food systems. And if we're going to get them transformed by 2050, that means we have to start right now, because farming and food production is a long-term business, and the food systems we have at the moment are well entrenched with all the infrastructure that goes with it and all the farms that have become specialized and industrialized. And the transition journey is going to take time and be challenging. So he's saying we have to get inside planetary boundaries and the journey starts now. And yet, if you look at our food systems today, we are a long, long way from where we need to be. Not only that, but until very recently, it looked as if nobody was really worried about it, apart from a few concerned citizens like yourselves, or people who got the food challenge and realised either for health reasons or for their own observation of their local environment, something needed to be done, maybe go organic or eat organic food. And I guess I was one of the early adopters, that's all I was. I was a Londoner. I had this experience that Alistair referred to in California, where I realised that in some sort of intuitive way, it wasn't really, to be honest, scientifically based, it was just a feeling really. And I wanted to do something about it, and I had no farming experience, so I got back to the land and learned how to farm, partly by farming on other people's farms, but then actually by practicing it. And over time, then I developed a set of ideas about how we could transform our food systems in an environment which was very economically hostile to what we were trying to do. So we had this bright idea of developing an organic market. And the idea of the organic market was that since we couldn't seem to be profitable farming sustainably, and I guess we'd definitely say organically because that's what it came to be, we thought, well, why don't we write down what we're doing, a prescription for sustainable agriculture, and take our story to the public and ask them to pay a premium in the shops for the food that is produced in that way. And that's what we did, and that's what then I did, working for the Soil Association. The development of the organic market was our method of responding to the fact that we couldn't seem to be profitable producing food in a more sustainable way. I've now realised that we were treating the symptom, not the cause, in developing a separate market for sustainable food, but I'll come to that in a moment. I mentioned just now that it seemed that nobody in influential circles was mindful of the impending ecological crisis, and nobody could have been more surprised than me when actually at a meeting that I was at in the House of Commons about 2 months ago, Michael Gove was asked to speak, and I know if anybody's involved with education, you've probably got a very negative view about Michael Gove, and I have a very negative view about Michael Gove and Brexit, because I'm a staunch Remainer, but you can ask any environmental NGOs or just about anybody about what Michael Gove has said since he's become Secretary of State for DEFRA, and they will say he hasn't really said anything that even the most radical NGOs could disagree with, which is gobsmacking, unbelievable. But it's the case. So I had the occasion to sit next to him because I was on a panel when he spoke at the launch of the Ceylon Soils Coalition, and a few of us spoke, John Soap from Greenpeace and a few others, and then it was Michael Gove's turn, and he gave the most radical speech I've ever heard a minister give. It was incredible. I've been around for a long time, back to Peter Walker, if you can even remember who he was. He was a Tory agriculture minister back in the 80s, or maybe even the 70s. And this guy Gove gets up and he says stuff which is, absolutely stuff that I would say. He said, we've got 30 years and we're facing an ecological catastrophe and we need to change. And so I got talking to him at the end of his talk, and he gave me his mobile number. And I'll come back to what happened, because we had a meeting 2 days ago with him, with a group that we set up that's been working on the new agenda for the last 18 months, which is really quite extraordinary, but I'll come back to that. The point is that he's saying the soils are running out, so that's what Johan Rossum's saying. And then I don't know if anybody read about this. This is a German study looking at insect populations on German nature reserves since 1989, and there's been a 75% reduction in insect populations. And just by way of anecdote, I regularly drive from London back to Wales, and back in the day, you used to get, especially in summer, but even in the autumn as well, you used to get a lot of insects on the windscreen. And it is incredible how few insects you get on windscreens these days. And this particular evening, I was driving back, it was just before the Gove experience. I was driving back to London, I drove down the M4, no insects. I drove into Wales, a few moths. I got to the bottom of my farm drive, and it was incredible. I kid you not, this place was just alive with small insects. And I just thought, this is amazing. And this was the same week that this study came out. And I thought, this is incredible. What's going on here? And my conclusion is that we've been on the farm for 44 years, and all we've been doing is trying to look after the soil and farm in a mixed way and farm in a biodiverse way. And the result, and we've got livestock. I'll come on to livestock again later. The combination of the fertility of the soil and the biodiversity in the soil, which is the bottom of the food pyramid for a whole host of organisms that more or less go back to the soil, is that we've got a very healthy population of insects. Earlier this week, where we had a meeting with Michael Gove, I was on a farm at the Wadston Estate, which is a National Trust estate in Buckinghamshire. What struck me when we were there, no fault of the farmers there because they want to change themselves, is the silence. There were no birds, or very few birds, and there was no birdsong. And yet on my farm, it's absolutely alive with birdsong. And these are indicators that it is possible to farm in a way which preserves the biodiversity, which can coexist with food production, which has been lost during my farming life. So the next thing, just to make the point about Jared Diamond and collapse, it's said that in Syria, one of the preconditions for the conflicts in Syria was food shortages, partly drought-induced. And I think that there are worrying indications that in relation to migration, for instance, that food insecurity is a primary cause of conflict. So for those people who voted Brexit out of fear of migration, this is relevant to that, if you see what I mean. Because we need to find a way of looking after local food security as an antidote to migration and the need to move, which very often is related to the security that people feel, families feel about living where they are. And very often the base of that is food security. I'm now going to go back onto the economics and the barriers to change, because if all this is the case, and Gove is mentioning it, and the nature conservation organisations are mentioning it, and Attenborough and Johan Rockström are describing it, why isn't change happening more quickly? And the answer is because at the moment, if you're a farmer, and this has already come up, it's more profitable to farm in an intensive way than it is to farm in a sustainable or organic way. And if you're a food company, exactly the same applies. So for farmers, what they've had to do to survive is to specialise and move towards monoculture, either of livestock production or of grain or vegetable production. More and more, fewer and fewer farms producing more and more of a particular commodity. Really, they have become commodity slaves, selling their products at a very low price because that's what the market does, whether it's potatoes or anything else. And if you try to farm in a more sustainable way, to survive, you need a higher price. And so this begs the question, why is it that we have this perverse economic system where apparently cheap food is causing all this damage, and if you try to farm in a better way, you price yourself out of the market, and then that leads to accusations of elitism and niche, and only wealthy people can afford sustainably produced food. So we, as the Sustainable Food Trust, decided to investigate this. We held a conference in San Francisco called The True Cost of American Food, where we got a lot of people together to look at why this was the case. And then more recently, we launched this report, which was just 2 weeks ago in London, the hidden cost of UK food. For every pound we spend on food, there's a hidden cost in damage to the environment and public health, which doesn't appear on the price of the food. And that cost splits 50-50 between the environment in various aspects and health, damage to public health. So we have the illusion of cheap food because the true costs are either not being paid for at all, or we're paying for them in hidden ways. So we're paying for them, for instance, through the National Health Service, through our taxes, which would be better named the National Disease Treatment Service, because it's picking up the damaging consequences of unsustainable and unhealthy farming and passing it on to human health problems. So if we look at all the problems relating to the NHS soaring costs at the moment, things like diabetes and obesity, rising cancers, diseases of the nervous system, allergies, many of them can in part be traced back to changes in farming practice and processing, which have adulterated our food, made it less health promoting, and we are carrying the consequences financially by paying through our taxation in there to the health service, but nobody's making that connection. Similarly with the environment, when you use a kilogram of nitrogen fertilizer, the farmer pays whatever it is, 80 or 90 pence for it, and gets a profit because it stimulates the growth of the crops. But cleaning up the nitrogen pollution and the cost of the emissions, which of course are contributing towards climate change, and other costs which are not paid for either by the fertilizer company or the farmer when they buy that nitrogen, these are called negative externalities, meaning external costs which don't appear on the pricing system, which are causing damage, is cancelling. If we taxed nitrogen fertilizer in proportion to the damage it was doing, it would probably triple the cost and wipe out the economic benefit to the farmer. But because the farmer obviously is driven by economics, and I can say this that because I've got a day job, I'm not so driven by economics on my farm, but most farmers aren't in that luxury position, then they have to follow the money, and the money tells them to use the nitrogen fertilizer, and once you use nitrogen, you're trapped on a treadmill and you have to use pesticides, fungicides, herbicides to control the pests, weeds and diseases which come from continuous monocropping. Those pesticides cause health externalities, and we're in this vicious circle, a treadmill of dependency, because we're not paying the true cost of the food in the shops. And if you look at it, there it all is. So we've got a food economy which the government will tell you is worth about 120 billion. The true food economy is 240 billion. Not 120 billion, but we're paying for it in hidden ways. The result of that is that farmers who try to, what's called in economist terms, internalize the externalities, in other words, farm in a sustainable way, because they have a conscience or they wish to farm that way for some sort of principle, they will make less money if they're farmers, and if they're food producers and taking the food to the consumer, it would be more of a struggle than if you just go down the 25 pence a kilo potato thing at the wholesale market, and then you put a bit of a markup on that, which means that the producer's getting less than the cost of production, and they're trapped in the cycle. We did it in the form of a shopping bill, because we just thought that would be, sum it up. And you can get a copy of that. Now, I want to move on in a moment to what we can eat, but before that I want to go back to Gove again, because Gove said, I said, we're working with a farmers working group to develop a new way in which we think you could reward farmers to get out of this treadmill, off this treadmill, and support a different kind of farming. He said, I'd like to meet. So I said, well, do you want to meet in London or on a farm? He said, both. So we had a meeting in London a couple of weeks ago, and then literally 2 days ago we had a second meeting on a farm in Buckinghamshire, the Wadston farm, and here is my report to you as what happened. They were two of the most remarkable meetings I've ever had with a minister, serving Minister of Agriculture / Food. I could not believe how keen he is to make changes. Now, obviously it's a bit sad that we're having to do this in a post-Brexit environment, because I still hope that Brexit doesn't happen. But regardless of whether Brexit does or doesn't happen, what Gove wants to do is right. And what he wants to do is he wants to introduce a polluter pays tax. This is my personal journey of trying to farm in harmony with nature, and I'll just run through it very quickly. These are our cows. Here's our cows. We're practicing what's called holistic grazing, which is another method of building soil fertility. They're coming to be milked. Here's me milking them, and I won't be milking them this weekend, but I will be milking them next weekend. Here's the cheese that we're making. We're making a cheddar-style cheese from the raw milk, where possible, and then we've been closed down with bovine TB, so we've had to pasteurize it, if that's of any interest. And then I'll just show you a picture, because Richard Dunn's son, who's called Sebastian, who's studying medicine at Cambridge just in his first year now, he had a drone. So he came and stayed with us for the weekend, and he said, would you like to take a film of the farm? So I said, yes, so here's the film. And we'll end on that, and then we can open it up and have some questions. all of you are spending at least £1,500 a year on food, probably more, especially if you include the food you eat out. You are the powerful ones, because if you change your buying habits and you commit to these people and you buy local food and you do what Erica's doing, then that will be, even if Gove didn't get its act together, that will change the food system. Now, as I said earlier, we don't need to do one or the other. And I think that finally the moment has come when governments are going to do this, because it's in the public interest and it's becoming a voting issue. I sense that this is going to be coming onto the agenda as a voting issue now. But in advance of that, or in parallel with that, if each of you made a deep commitment that you will source a significantly higher percentage of your food, I know some of you are already on this journey, but to take it further, where you actually move towards supporting the local food economy. This is not just a worthy thing to do. It's going to promote your health, it's going to promote, and it's going to deliver a lot of social benefits, and it's going to support the emergence of the local and sustainable food economy that we need to replace the one we've got at the moment.
Just wondering if Mr. Gove's radical plans to change food subsidies, will that be made easier or more difficult post-Brexit? Is he currently constrained by the Common Agricultural Policy rules? And will he?
It's an irony that now everybody's talking about how we've got this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change our agricultural policy and incentives, as I was describing post-Brexit, when if you look at the Common Agricultural Policy as it has been, there have been member states trying to reform it for decades, and the government, which has been the most unreconstructed and Philistine, guess who? The UK. And that's not just the Tories, also the Labour government, because they just thought that, you know, we need to produce cheap food as efficiently as possible on global markets. So we held back the greening of the CAP during the time we were members, and now suddenly we're saying the CAP is fossilised. I'm not saying the CAP's perfect, but I think the changes I've been describing could be implemented within the Common Agricultural Policy. And so just take one example, the soil carbon thing that I was talking about. The French minister, Stéphane Le Foll, who's the French Minister of Agriculture, he came up with this brilliant idea in the COP21 talks. He introduced a 4 per 1,000 scheme, which has basically set a target, which a lot of member states have signed up to increase the soil carbon on all the farms in Europe and the world by 0.4% per year. And even the British government signed up to it, although you wouldn't know it from what's happened so far. But the Germans are really keen on it, and their minister, who's just about still their minister, Christian Schmidt, although I don't think he will be for very long because of what's happening with the German election, he's really enthusiastic about this. And the German government asked me to go to Marrakesh with them to the COP22 talks to talk about soil carbon incentive payments. So this conversation is going on within the European Union as well as here in Britain. But what they haven't had, and what is remarkable about Gove, if we believe his rhetoric and if he delivers, is he really is talking a radical game. And if we stayed in the European Union, if Gove happened to stay on, it would be great because he would be a voice for change.
For a very interesting talk, Patrick. My question is quite brief. Can a successful organic community farm operate without livestock?
Tolhurst, who's arguably the guru of stockless horticulture, diverse box scheme, all the things that you're doing, and he was like one of the elders. He's one of the elders. He's my sort of age of the movement, and he's doing it without stock. I think it's easier to do it if you're growing vegetables because you can compost and you can buy in, all sorts of green waste and stuff like that, and also you rely a lot on worms, which are a form of livestock. But if you're asking me they really, the weight of earthworms on an acre of soil, I think, is more than the biomass weight of a cow, if you see what I mean. So there are a lot of livestock in this. It's just that you don't see them all the time. And but I think that there's a guy called Michael Abelman who's the kind of Ian Tolhurst equivalent in North America. And I was at a conference a couple of years ago where somebody was saying we need to switch to a completely plant-based diet, and it's more efficient to produce plant foods than it is to have livestock because they're inefficient, all those sort of arguments. And he said, and this is a guy who's only growing vegetables, He said, I don't think I could do it as well as I'm doing it without livestock, but I'm buying in manure, whether it's horse manure from horses that haven't been treated, or I'm using animal manures as part of my composting system, because there's something about the stomach of animals, and our stomachs actually, the so-called microbiome, which is like a starter for bacterial enlivenment of soils, which really helps. So if you look at the guy I put the picture of, Joel Salatin, he says that all the fertile soils in the Midwest of America were built by an interaction between bison and grass. And that was the system of ranging herds of bison, manuring the land, treading on it, and then that builds soil. So the answer is yes, you can do it without, but if you look at the whole of Britain and you farm it in a sustainable way, I would say, especially Wales, by the way, which is like 90% grass, and we want to produce food from Wales, I think livestock are going to play an essential role. We're just going to need to get rid of all the ones that are intensively farmed, which are absolutely part of the problem. And so I think in relation to the question about livestock, veganism and vegetarianism, we need to, there's no ethical issue about being vegan or vegetarian, obviously, but there is an issue about being discerning about which of the livestock are part of the solution and which are part of the problem. We need to become discerning eaters. We shouldn't, it's rather like saying plant food is either good or bad. It depends on how the plants are grown. It's exactly the same with the livestock.
I think you've got always a good question to ask, and I think when it comes to a community-owned small holding, a farm that's only 13 acres, and then you're looking at which ours is versus like perhaps a larger farm, which is maybe more able to deliver having livestock and vegetable production. You have to take those sort of things into balance. I think when you're running a community-owned organisation with minimal hours as well, there's a complexity with having livestock and a need to have people on the land, and that, I suppose, from a small community perspective, it probably isn't the most feasible logistical thing to be able to deliver really well. I don't know if that's fair to say, Patrick, but I think you probably need a decent sized farm to be able to do that.
It's hard, yeah, I agree. But also you can have if you get manures in, then you have like you can have a partnership relationship with livestock producers, especially if you're producing on a horticultural level, and get their good, healthy manures into your composting system. That's good, I think.
I was wondering how you would go about bringing the consumption of meat down to a sustainable level.
How much meat could Britain produce, of what kinds, if it was farmed in a sustainable way? And what we are planning to do in the new year is commission like a desk study. So imagine the UK farm converted to sustainable production. What would that look like? How much of the land would be in grass and fertility building? How many beef, cattle, sheep, and free-range poultry and pigs would that land support with a reduced area of arable crops? Because we'd probably halve the grain production if we went sustainable. And then what does that translate into on a per capita basis? How much milk could we drink in a week? How much dairy products? How much grass-fed beef and lamb could you eat if you weren't a vegan or a vegetarian? Which would be compatible with the whole of the UK being farmed sustainably. And the honest answer is I don't know the answer to that question. But I think there might be some surprising elements of it, like we could actually have more beef than we're eating at the moment. It's interesting if you look at statistics of livestock consumption. Chicken's gone up dramatically, it's still rising. I think it's gone up, 30 or 40% since the millennium or something like that. Beef production has been falling, has been falling since the 1980s. Now we've transferred our animal fat consumption to plants. And this is really interesting. Apparently at the turn of the 20th century, 80% of our fats came from animals. Now it's 20%. And guess where the 80% of the fats are coming from? Palm oil in Indonesia. So we're destroying the rainforests for our fat consumption, or soya, genetically modified soya production from North and South America. So our fat footprint, yes, it's switched from animals to plants, but there have been some pretty devastating consequences, and the jury's out as to whether plant fats, not all plant fats, but many plant fats, are any healthier for us than the animal fats that we are now burning. So for instance, beef fat, tallow, is incinerated in vast quantities. It's just not being consumed anymore because it's gone so out of fashion. So actually, fat is a very important issue, and that does go back to livestock. And if we kept healthy livestock, why wouldn't we want to consume their fats if we haven't got ethical objections? So we'll try to answer your question in a more detailed way, I hope, sometime in 2018.
A huge issue with the way we eat as a not just a nation in the United Kingdom, but as a global nation, really, and in the Western world. We approach food, we've got so used to not eating, like you said, the things that are not used are the animals. We are so used to eating certain types of meat, certain cuts of beef, and we're so used to having food. How many people do you know that cannot have a meal without meat in it? And then I find that's a very strange concept. I'm not a vegetarian myself, but I'm probably 80% vegetarian throughout the week, and I find it very strange. I have lots of friends who, if I was to suggest let's go out for a vegetarian meal or a vegetarian curry or come around to my house for vegetarian food, it's just the look on their face of horror. It's amazing, and you just don't understand why. There's an association in our minds that the good food has to come with meat, and you can't have good foods and vegetables that will fill you up. But you can, and it's a very strange thing, and it doesn't get help in the way that we watch TV, and the way even like cookery programs. I mean, I don't know if you watch MasterChef at the moment that's on TV, it is a particular favourite of mine, but nevertheless, they don't seem to be able to do anything without meat. And anyone who comes along and tries to do something vegetarian, they're almost dismissed straight away, and you're not going to get through. It's not good cooking. You have to have, and that's a very interesting part of our culture. And I don't know the answer as to how we change it, other than trying to give people good food and to get people trying good fresh vegetables and to be happy. That's my backing orchestra when I get angry about it.
I'd like to go back to Michael Grove. He obviously is an MP, and things change very quickly. If, for instance, he does get his way, and or is pushing to get his way, is it likely to push the cost of food up?
It will and it should push the costs of intensively produced food up, because we're not paying the honest, true price for it at the moment. But conversely, it could actually bring the price of sustainably produced food down, and therefore reduce the differential between the two. And therefore it would be easier to reach a tipping point where it's a bit like, lead-free petrol or something like that. If there's a price difference and it gets narrow enough, you think, oh, well, I believe that it's the right thing to do, I'll make the change. So at the moment, it's so much of a price differential that most people say, well, I'd like to eat sustainably produced food or organic food, but frankly, look at how much more I'd have to spend for it. It's just too much of a difference. But if we brought the gap quite close, I think we would reach a tipping point. But to the other part of your question is this a political disaster for, say, the Prime Minister to say, we're going to take action, or I'm going to allow my Secretary of State for DEFRA to introduce the polluter pays tax, which will put up the price of industrial food? And that is the question, isn't it? I mean, it's the question of our time, because that's what we need to do if we're going to protect the planet for future generations. I think we're getting to the point where more and more people, especially young people, know about this stuff, and they would be happy with that. But it's a very fine judgment. But I think also you've got to keep on reminding people they're already paying in hidden ways. The health service costs, the water bills where we're stripping out the pesticides and the nitrates, or climate change, irreversible climate change. It's not so we're not paying for these things. We're going to pay in a devastating way. So I think it would be disingenuous to say that it won't have an impact on food prices, but the worst food will cost more, and that's how it should be.
I think as well, it's interesting that in the last certainly post-war, in the last 50 years, the inflation of certainly vegetables versus the inflation of many other commodities that you buy, it seems to be one that has grown at a lot less fast rate, a lot slower rate than that's out there. We look at the moment that in the last year we've had inflation of 3%. Yeah, as a sort of veg distributor and a veg grower, the pressure that we're under at the farm to keep our prices at a stable price, or if not a little bit lower, and then what the reaction might be if we were to put our veg box prices up, for example, it's a very difficult climate to work within. And I think as a society, again, there needs to be a better valuing of food, and we need to realise there is such social importance to it. Conversely, we have a huge food poverty issue, and again, it's a very difficult compromise to work out how it is that we can raise the price of food to pay fair price for food, perhaps, in some areas, as we're discussing, but then how do you address the huge food poverty that we're facing in the United Kingdom as well? I don't know the answer to that. It's a very interesting
But
project around.
that's political too, isn't it? So I think that's the other half of the question. First of all, with the general public who can afford to spend more on their food, we spend under 10% now of our disposable income on food, whereas it used to be 30% in the 70s, so the answer is we can. But for the people who can't afford, then surely it's the government's responsibility to do some kind of safety net stuff. In the US it's called food stamps, but we need to make sure that the lower income groups are not denied good food through price factors, and I think that can be done. That's what governments are there to do.
How do you get access to land? There's a great film that came out recently, In Our Hands, which was by the Land Workers Alliance, that talked about small farms being twice as efficient as large farms. But how do we get young people, how do we get more people onto the land?
I didn't have any money when I got back to the land, and for about 25 years I was a tenant farmer, and then less than that, but 25 years I was either a tenant farmer or I had like a 20% share of the farm that I was farming. It wasn't until I got a loan from Triodos Bank in 2005 that I finally bought the farm that I'd got back to the land on some 30 years before. And I think it's a really difficult problem. And I heard a programme, I think it was on Radio 4 the other day, about land tax and how you can shift. If only people who used land were allowed to use it without being taxed, it would completely change the land market, and it would allow young people to get a foothold in farming. And I think if you look at the average age of a farmer now, I think it's over 60 and going up. But now there are young people like yourselves who want to get into farming, and lots of you. And I think that's the most optimistic thing. And I believe that there will be changes, because the truth is that the current farming population are dying. So it's got to make way for a new way of people coming in. And I think that can happen. How we do it is maybe the creative intelligence of young people will make it happen. I think it's going to happen. I think all the stuff I've been talking about tonight is like a change that's trying to happen. It's out there, especially amongst millennials. People know this has got to happen, and it's becoming an unstoppable force. Maybe Gove's just sensed that. He's a politician. Politicians do that. They kind of put their finger in the wind, and I think he knows that this has got to change.
I think what's interesting about land access, we at Bristol Food Producers, we ran a land seekers survey with Land Workers Alliance as well, and what we found was that it's people, yes, young people who are trying to get into farming. It's very encouraging, but also they want small plots of land. They don't want 20, 30, 40 acres. They want 2 to 5 acres, 2 to 8 acres, and that is incredibly difficult to get hold of. Now, I was at a meeting with Rich over there from Fresh Radio today, and I discussed it with Triodos previously as well. We mooted the idea of perhaps land trusts that could be set up, if backed by a bank, where people can invest in these, almost like a CIC, like a community interest company, which will allow people to buy land on a larger scale, and that thing can be loaned out to people, rented to people on non-secure tenancies, as long as they perhaps hit certain criteria of agroecological farming, which a lot of people do want to do. So we have to, like Patrick said, we have to be very innovative about the way we approach it, because quite frankly, land is ridiculously priced, and people don't want to let go of land. And some organisations, some of the supermarkets that were mentioned before, they're very good at land blocking as well, and holding on to land, brownfield sites, and not letting people get their access to it to be able to grow on, and that's a really, really big problem. And there needs to be legislation change on that as well.
But if Gove or whoever it is brings in, a requirement for farms to build soil fertility, the whole system we've got is going to collapse. So this is going to open up new opportunities, because I think that to rebuild the fertility of the soil to produce healthy food, it's going to require far more people to come into food production. So it has to happen. There have to be new openings for young people to come in. It just will happen somehow.
And the reality is that farming is an ageing population. It's a problem that Soil Association have tried to address through their Future Growers programme. but farmers are getting older and they're encouraging their children not to get into farming because it's not. They think, oh, you know, you don't want to go through the hell I've been through in my lifetime. Go do something else. Become a surveyor. Become a marketeer.
Yeah, even organic farms.
Yeah.
That's quite
It's
scary.
It's amazing.